From an early age, Ravi out of something he stood the wandered, but as a treasure always slipping through his fingers. Now, at 24, he found himself in the city, chasing an education that seemed as elusive as the life he had imagined. His scholarship covered only a fraction of his tuition, and the rest he tried to earn through part-time jobs. Some nights he stayed up until dawn delivering food. Other nights he tutored children in cramped apartments. Yet, despite his relentless effort, the debt only seemed to grow larger. There were times he skipped meals to save bus fare, and there were mornings he walked for hours to campus, carrying heavy books in a worn-out bag that had long lost its straps. It was during one of these tutoring jobs that Ravi first met Eleanor Hartley. She wasn't his student, but the grandmother of a boy he tutored in English literature. The child's parents were too busy, so she often sat nearby, listening in silence while Ravi explained Shakespeare's lines or Dickens' descriptions. Her presence had unsettled him at first, for she had a way of watching with a kind of quiet intensity, as though weighing the worth of every word he spoke. She was unlike any older woman Ravi had ever seen. At 71, Eleanor carried herself with elegance and grace. Her silver hair was always neatly tied, her clothes understated yet expensive, and her eyes, sharp, thoughtful, with a trace of sadness, seemed to pierce through anyone who dared meet them. Over time, she began asking Ravi questions after lessons ended, not about grammar or novels, but about his life. "How do you balance your studies and work?" she asked once, her gaze steady. "I don't balance," Ravi admitted with a shy smile. "I just manage, somehow." "Do you ever think of giving up?" He shook his head. "If I give up, what else is left?" She had nodded then, a small smile tugging at her herning. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor began inviting Ravi to stay longer after lessons. They would drink tea in her sunlit garden, where roses bloomed despite the harsh city air. She would tell him about the places she had traveled in her youth. Paris in spring, Venice in the rain, the wide deserts of Morocco. Ravi listened with rapt attention, for her life was a world he had never known. In return, he shared his struggles, his fears of never escaping poverty, and his desperate hope that education might open doors he had never seen. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Ravi confessed that he might have to abandon his studies. The tuition was too much, and no matter how hard he worked, it wasn't enough. Eleanor said nothing for a long while. Then she reached across the table, her frail hand covering his. "You must never abandon your mind, Ravi," she said softly. "It's worth more than any fortune." Something in the way she spoke touched him deeply. From that day forward, he looked at her differently. Not as just an old woman with wealth, but as someone who carried wisdom and loneliness in equal measure. It was during a quiet afternoon, after nearly 6 months of these meetings, that Eleanor made her proposal. Ravi was reading aloud from a book when she suddenly interrupted. "Ravi," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "Have you ever considered marriage?" He blinked, confused. "Marriage, me? I can't even afford to take care of myself. What if you didn't have to worry about that?" she asked, watching him closely. He laughed nervously, thinking it a jest. "I think anyone is lining up to marry a broke student." The Eleanor smiled faintly of words that the word would turn his world upside down. "What if I asked you to marry me?" For a moment, Ravi thought he had misheard. His heart pounded as he tried to comprehend the weight of what she was saying. She was 71, a woman older than his mother, and yet here she was offering him something that sounded both absurd and impossible. "Mom, I don't understand," he stammered. "Why would you want to marry me?" "Because," she said simply, "we're kind. You are honest. You listen to me. Not as a woman past her prime, not as a wealthy widow, but as a human being. Do you know how rare that is?" Ravi was silent. A storm of thoughts raged in his mind. Was this real? Was it a test? Would people laugh at him? Would they condemn him as a fortune hunter? And yet, another thought crept in. The thought of his unpaid fees, his mother's tired face, the endless cycle of poverty. Marriage to Eleanor could end all of that in an instant. But was it right? Eleanor seemed to sense his hesitation. She leaned back, her voice softer now. "I don't expect you to love me the way a young man loves a young woman. I ask only for companionship, for honesty. I am tired of being surrounded by people who want nothing but my money. I want someone I can trust." That night, Ravi walked through the city streets in a daze. The neon lights blurred, the noise of traffic faded, and all he could hear were voices echoing in his mind. His conscience wrestled with his ambition. Part of him wanted to run away, to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Yet another part whispered that this might be the chance fate had finally offered. A week later, Ravi gave her his answer. The wedding was small, private, held in the garden where they had shared countless conversations. Eleanor wore a simple ivory gown, her silver hair framing her face like a crown. Ravi stood beside her, awkward in his rented suit, his hands trembling as he held hers. The officiant's words blurred together, drowned out by the pounding of his heart. When it was done, when the papers were signed and the vows exchanged, Eleanor looked up at him with a smile almost secretive. "Time will show you why I chose you," she whispered. The guests clapped politely. Ravi forced a smile, but inside, confusion and unease lingered. He had entered a new life, one he never could have imagined. But deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's words carried a meaning far beyond what he understood. And as the evening sky turned crimson, Ravi realized that his story had only just begun. 7 days had passed since the wedding, and Ravi was still learning to breathe in this new world that now belonged to him, with its endless halls and antique furnishings, felt more like a museum than a home. The silence was almost unsettling, broken only by the distant ticking of grandfather clocks and the occasional creak of wood underfoot. At night, when he lay in a bed far too large for one man, Ravi often found himself wondering if he had made the right choice. People in the neighborhood had their opinions, and they were rarely kind. On the few occasions of the wedding, he overheard whispers, sharp, cutting remarks about how a poor boy had ensnared a wealthy old woman. Strangers laughed behind his back, and acquaintances from university looked at him differently now, as though his achievements had been erased by suspicion. But what unsettled him most wasn't the judgment of others. It was Eleanor herself. She treated him with warmth and patience, yes, but there was something unspoken in her gaze. She often watched him when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes heavy with meaning, as if she was waiting for the right moment to reveal something. And on the 7th day of their marriage, that moment arrived. It was late in the afternoon, the sunlight streaming through tall stained glass windows, scattering colors across the marble floor. Ravi was in the library, flipping through a novel to distract himself, when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She leaned on her carved cane, though she didn't seem to need it, and regarded him quietly before speaking. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made his chest tighten. "Time for what?" he asked, closing the book. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him. "You've walked these halls for days now, yet you've seen only the surface of this house. There is something I want to show you. Something you must understand." He frowned, uncertain whether to be curious or afraid. "What is it?" Instead of answering, she reached into the pocket of her gown and drew out a small key. It was old, and its brass dowel was engraved a delicate crest he did not recognize. She held it out to him. "Take this," she said. "Go to the 3rd floor. There is a study at the end of the east wing. It has been locked for many years. You must open it." Ravi hesitated, staring at the key as if it carried more than just metal weight. "Why me?" "Because you are my husband," Eleanor replied softly. "And because you are ready," with his pulse quickening. Ravi accepted the key and made his way through the winding corridors. Each step up the grand staircase seemed to echo louder than the last. The 3rd floor was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, the air thick with the scent of dust and time. He followed her instructions until he reached a door unlike the others. Taller, heavier, its wavered with intricate patterns almost swallowed by shadows. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the key into the lock. With a click, the door groaned open, releasing a breath of stale air as though the room itself had been waiting to exhale. Ravi stepped inside and froze. The study was vast, its walls lined with shelves that bowed under the weight of countless journals, ledgers, and books. Dust danced in the shafts of light spilling through a tall arched window. The air smelled of leather and old paper. On one desk lay stacks of documents, yellowed with age but meticulously organized. He moved closer, curiosity urging him forward. As he scanned the pages, his eyes widened. These weren't ordinary records, blueprints for inventions decades ahead of their time, machines, formulas, and designs Ravi had only seen in history books. Financial journals detailed early investments in companies that now dominated the world, names that any business then would recognize. It was as though Eleanor had predicted, or controlled, the tides of history itself. But none of that compared to what he saw next. At the far end of the room stood a large framed portrait. The canvas, though old, had been carefully preserved. It depicted a young man dressed in 19th century attire, standing with quiet confidence. But what stunned Ravi was the face. It was his face. The resemblance was uncanny down to the curve of his jaw, the arch of his brows, even the faint dimple that appeared when he smiled. His knees weakened as he stumbled backward, staring at the impossible image. He turned the frame, desperate for some explanation, and on the back he found faded handwriting. It was at 1895. Coldness swept over him. What is this?" he whispered. Behind him, the door creaked. Eleanor had followed him silently and now stood in the threshold, her figure illuminated by the faint glow of dusk. "That," she said, her voice trembling, "is the man I once loved. His name was Jonathan. He was everything to me. But he was taken before his time." Ravi turned toward her, his heart pounding. "But you see it too," she murmured, stepping closer. "I knew you would. The day I met you, I felt it." The same presence. The same light in your eyes. You are not just his likeness, Ravi. You are his echo, his soul, returned caught. He wanted to dismiss her words as fantasy, the ramblings of an old woman clinging to memories. But as he stood there, surrounded by secrets too vast to deny, he couldn't. The weight in his chest, the strange pull he had felt since meeting her, all seemed to fit into this revelation. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she touched the portrait with trembling fingers. The world believes I am 71. They don't know the truth. I have much longer, kept alive by knowledge, by secrets buried in these books. I have watched generations rise and fall, all while carrying the memory of the man I lost. And now he stands before me again. Ravi's throat was dry. You're saying I am him. I am saying, she replied softly, that you are more than you know. That fate has brought you back to me. I do not expect you to understand now. He staggered back, his ankle, his mind spinning. The wealth, the mansion, the marriage, it was never about security or loneliness. It was about something far stranger, far older than he could comprehend. He glanced at the portrait again. At the face that mirrored his own across more than a century. In that moment, a shiver ran through him. Not of fear, but of recognition. Somewhere deep within, a memory stirred, faint and fleeting, like the echo of a dream he could almost recall. And as Eleanor watched him with eyes that had waited lifetimes, Ravi realized that his marriage had not simply changed his future. It had entangled him in a story written long before he was born.